Friends, it is just wonderful to see all your faces and locations this morning. Um, we are preparing for really a wonderful hour of learning. Just want to make a couple of quick announcements. We love the robust and enthusiastic participation of everybody. Today's class, we've got a lot of text to cover. Rabbi is going to pause 4 different times. So Rabbi or I will call on people. If you could just do us a favor, we'll unmute yourselves when we call on you, and then we'll try and make sure that we give everybody, a turn to participate over the course of the class. As we've done the past couple weeks, we've taken just a couple minutes to allow a couple people to introduce themselves to the group so we can all get to know each other better. It's, we have a nice smiling faces here on the screen, but I know some of you actually live really close to each other and you might not know that. So we have a couple more people coming in now. I'm just admitting them. But I wonder who would like to start. Just take a couple of minutes and great, tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got connected to JTS. Just need to, Joel, you can go first. You just need to unmute.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Joel Politzer. Currently, I'm in Parkland, Florida. We will be moving up to Valencia World in Palm Beach County within the next few months. I'm a physician. I've been down here in Broward County in Southeast Florida for 40 years, originally from upstate New York. I got involved with JTS through Rabbi Matt. Did his lunch and learn in Mike Greenberg's offices for however long that was going on. Carolyn and I also have a very, very long friendship and affiliation. Our sons were best friends when they were in high school. During a period of time in the early aughts, as they're called, I taught. My training is internal medicine oncology, but then I did a mid-career change to hospice and palliative medicine. For a few years, I taught Jewish medical ethics and end-of-life ethics at the seminary in New York to, I believe it was fourth year rabbinic students. I'm not certain who got me involved in that and also how I got uninvolved in that. I did that for a few years and also have taught the similar topic to Matt's students in Jerusalem. That was in English. אבל אני רוצה שהפעם הבאה אני רוצה ללמוד את זה בעברית. I'm doing an Ulpan. I never realized how difficult Hebrew actually is because of the genders. Everything has gender, and it drives me crazy. And every time I tell the teachers, this is really hard, they go, try learning English. Yeah, that's, that's how I got involved, and that's how I stay involved.
Wonderful. Thank you. Joel is also practically a neighbor. He lives about a mile away from me. So not in Sydney, but Parkland.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have anyone else who'd like to introduce themselves this morning? Susan? We just need you to unmute.
My name is Susan Salzman, and this particular connection to JTS was made through my friend Toby Deutsch, whom you may have heard of. In 2012, I wanted to go to Israel. It was the first time that I had ever been there. And I asked Toby if she would like to travel with me. And she said yes. And on that trip, I met Rabbi Matt. He was a gracious host to us, serving us dinner in his home and taking us out to some of the lesser known sites along the streets of Jerusalem. So that's how I got to know Rabbi Matt. And then he was teaching something in the Berkshires, I think, and Toby and I went to hear him, and I just fell in love with his way of handling teaching. I love the process of looking at other sources in relation to texts. And when I heard that that Rabbi was teaching this class, I decided to join it, and I'm very glad that I did.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
One more person want to go this morning to introduce themselves? Toby, thank you.
Yeah, I may as well introduce myself since Susan did it already. My name is Toby Deutsch, and I live in Sarasota, Florida. And my connection to JTS, Carolyn and I were talking about this, probably goes back. I've been in Florida 21 years, originally as a snowbird, and probably first met Carolyn about 19 or 20 years ago, and met Chancellor Schorsch, who became a good friend of and mentor of my husband, Larry, and studied with Matt when he was the Florida JTS outreach rabbi. I don't remember what the title of it was. And even though I no longer belong to conservative synagogue, I belong to an unaffiliated synagogue, I have found Matt to be a wonderful teacher, as well as the other JTS faculty. And again, Matt was gracious when Susan and I were there in 2012. And then a few years later, I visited with my family when my grandchildren were in their B'nai Mitzvah. It was the summer before they were B'nai Mitzvah, and Matt again was so gracious, and it was wonderful to reconnect with him. And I try not to miss any opportunity to learn with Matt.
Wonderful. Thank you,
Thank you,
Toby.
Toby.
Yeah, many, many years. I want to also welcome Helene Kendon, who's joining us for the first time this morning. And I promise you we will have time in future classes for everyone else who hasn't had a chance yet to introduce themselves to be able to do so properly. So again, good morning to some of us, good afternoon to others. Rabbi Berkowitz, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you, Carolyn. Boker Tov, good morning to all of you in North America, and Tzoraim Tovim, again from Israel. I want to welcome you back to this virtual Beit Midrash, and also, of course, to JTS's campus in Israel, the Shokin Library. Indeed, I want to remind you that your voices are being heard in Yerushalayim. It's quite special that technology enables this, but one of the gifts that we have in the Shokin Library is that we're directly across the street from the Prime Minister's residence. Literally, it's stone's throw from my office. I look out into the courtyard of his residence. So Bibi can just about hear you speaking words of Torah as we engage in our learning. So it is quite special, and I hope these words of Torah will influence his leadership these days. That said, where we left off, in the aftermath of Parashat Yitro, which is the spiritual pinnacle of all of Torah, as we literally stand at the foot of Mount Sinai, we now come to Parashat Mishpatim. And the focus of Parashat Mishpatim is the minutia of civil law. That will strike you immediately as you begin reading this parsha, right? And your eyes might glaze over as the parsha gets deeper and deeper into the details, right, you lose a sense of the connections between the different laws, right? And it strikes us in a way as stream of consciousness legal thinking that we have here, okay? But it is quite notable that we move from this spiritual pinnacle, right, to the nitty gritty of law, of civil law. So perhaps the lesson of all of this is that spiritual ecstasy must ultimately be translated into practical law, into tachlis, into the doing, so that we can actualize what it is that was revealed to us at Sinai and build a just society. Though I could have focused on any one of a number of curious laws in this week's Torah reading, I've chosen to do something very, very different this week and explore the ethical treatment of animals. Now, I do want to say that my goal is not to turn you all into vegetarians over the course of this hour. That might end up happening as a result of this text study. I take no responsibility, but I can assure you that Carolyn Cantor will be thrilled if that happens. One of the reasons that I decided to latch on to this particular topic for Mishpatim is can't remember if it was the end of last week or very, very beginning of this week, a column written by Nicholas Kristof caught my eye in the New York Times, in which he wrote extensively about Costco chickens and how those chickens are raised. Probably a number of you caught that article as well. And I know this is a problem not only at Costco, but throughout the entire poultry industry. So, you know, I want to make clear that it's not only Costco that's guilty in this, but even in the kashrut industry, this is a serious problem. As I began thinking about that, and as I began wrestling with the various teachings of the Parsha, I felt that this would be a very, very intriguing topic for us to cover this morning. So I've entitled it, On the Wings of Eagles and the Backs of Donkeys, Exploring Ethical Treatment of Animals. And so I want to begin with that particular teaching that connects very, very well to ethical treatment of animals, and that is from Exodus chapter 23, verses 4 and 5. Okay, this is our first source. I'm going to share a screen so we all have it in front of us. Okay. Carolyn, you can see it clearly? Yes, great. Okay. So, whoops. I don't know what just happened to our view.
There we go.
Okay, our first source, Exodus 23, verses 4 through 5, which teaches, when you encounter your enemy's ox or ass, donkey wandering, you must take it back to him. When you see the donkey of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. So the case that we're reading here involves humanitarian considerations. But not just humanitarian considerations as it refers to our fellow human being, and not just our fellow, but we're talking about an enemy here, ironically enough, that it's talking about. We return their property or we help them out. But also this is about the prevention of cruelty to animals, right? Notice it's talking about a donkey that collapses under its weight. So this is a very, very important biblical and rabbinic principle, which is known as tsar ba'alei chayim, right? This is the prevention of cruelty to animals, or literally tsar ba'alei chayim is the suffering of animals. It's something that we need to take note of. The verse is notable in itself since it demonstrates both concern for your fellow, even though this person is your enemy, as well as concern for the animal, for the donkey. And then in Parashat Mishpatim, only a few verses later, Exodus, same chapter 23, verse 12, we read there, regarding our observance of Shabbat. 6 days you will do your work, but on the 7th day you will cease from labor, in order that your ox and your donkey may rest, and that your bondsman and the stranger may be refreshed. Sheshet yamim ta'aseh ma'asecha, uvayom hashvi'i tishbot lema'an yanuach shorcha v'chamorecha vayinafash ben amatcha v'hager. Right, so the command to observe Shabbat not only applies to human beings, but it also applies to the animals that are in our homes and in our gates. Continuing with this theme, right, there are numerous other places in Torah that we see the ethical treatment of animals underscored. For instance, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verse 4, you will not muzzle an ox while it is threshing. Lo tachsom shor b'disho. So threshing was normally done by animals that trampled stalks, or if not trampling the stalks, what they did is they pulled a threshing sledge. Right? The animal would inevitably stop to eat some of the grain that was being threshed or trampled right below the animal. And there was, it's understandable that the farmer would do what the farmer could to prevent the animal from eating this grain, right? After all, this is the livelihood of the farmer. But Torah is telling us, right, do not be petty, even with our animals, right? We have to be generous, right? And it's simply the way of the world, it's natural, right, that the ox is going to want to eat while it's working, and we should not deprive the animal of that snack time during threshing. Deuteronomy 22, verse 10, which teaches you will not plow with an ox and a donkey together. What is this about? It seems that we have this particular legislation since an ox and donkey are of unequal strength. And so the concern is that if these two animals are yoked together, the stronger one could exhaust the weaker animal, or one animal might cause the other to stumble and be injured. Okay, so it seems that that's what's at the basis of this particular law. Okay, the famous or infamous law for some of you, lo tivashel gedi bechelev imo, you will not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Okay, so what is this about? Obviously, right, from the pshat, from the literal sense of the text, it seems that this is addressing the sensitivity to the animal's feelings. This particular commandment is one of the core commands of kashrut, right, of the whole system of Jewish dietary laws, and it's actually repeated 3 times in Torah, 3 times. And of course, the rabbis say whenever we have repetition, it's not superfluous repetition, but it has to come to teach us something unique in every single one of its utterances. So what is it coming to teach us in that 3-fold repetition? It's coming to teach us 3 prohibitions regarding milk and meat. Those 3 prohibitions are: 1, we cannot cook such a mixture of milk and meat. 2, we cannot eat it. And 3, we can't even derive benefit from it, right? In other words, right, according to halakha in its strictest sense, how it is that the rabbis interpret it, right, we can't even hold stocks in McDonald's or Burger King or any other restaurant, right, that cooks milk and meat. Our next source, Leviticus, 2 more sources that I want to share, and then we're going to open it up to conversation. Leviticus 22, verse 28, which teaches us the following: no animal from the herd or from the flock will be slaughtered on the same day with its young. In rabbinic tradition, they took this a step further, such that the law forbids such sacrifices even after 8 days, right? That you have to wait a period of 8 days. And it expresses compassion for living creatures once again. Finally, Deuteronomy 22, verses 6 through 7, which teaches the following. This is the mitzvah, very, very curious mitzvah of what is known in Hebrew as Shiluach Haken. It states the following: if along the road you chance upon a bird's nest, do not take the mother together with her young. Let the mother go and take only the young. So what is this about? This is partly about reverence for parent-child relationships, even amongst animals. It's also about sparing the mother the painful sight of taking her offspring away. In addition, it's about conservation, that is conservation of natural resources and sustainability. We want to be sure that the mother is not killed too, but that the mother can go on and have other offspring. And then one commentator actually says the following, that God does not want any species to become extinct, right? And that's why we engage in this particular mitzvah. So I want to take it off of screen share and open it to comments or questions that you have on anything that we just covered. There was a whole lot there.
Diane
Diane.
Chotterman.
Yeah, so we were commanded in the very beginning to take care of the earth. That is one of the most, in Bereshit, so to speak. But I just want to say one small thing. Having been a member of Hazon for a very long time, I'm really too old to go on the bike trips and things like that. But I have to tell you that you cannot talk about the kosher laws without thinking about how they treat their workers and employees. It just can't be done. I am so proud of Hazon for starting that movement. And as you're talking, with all the wonderful things that the Bible does talk about the animals, we have to think in terms of those who are the humans that are helping us to.
Absolutely, Diane. In fact, the first thing that I'm thinking of as you're talking, you're reminding us all of the Rabushkin scandal about 15 years ago, right? That went on in
Rabushkin,
Pottsville,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And right, the whole scandal that occurred there with migrant workers, foreign workers. But it wasn't only that; it was also the treatment of animals as well. How they were treating their animals, which was very, very disturbing. And I think you're right in so many ways. When we're thinking about kashrut, even though al pi halacha, according to halacha, right, kashrut is one area and ethical treatment of human beings is another area. I do believe you're right, Diane, and I believe Hazon is right, and I believe more and more people in the Jewish world are right about this, that in order for something to be kosher, right, it has to involve other aspects apart from the treatment of animals and how it is that animals are slaughtered ethically, but in addition, how it is that we treat our workers. It's a very, very important component of who we are. That's vital, and I'm so glad that you're bringing that up. It's consequential to the discussion that we're having here. Other questions or comments? Barbara.
I just have a comment. I don't think there's anything to argue or discuss. I think that from the very beginning, the Torah has told us that yes, we may have to, some of us choose, excuse me, Carolyn, to choose to eat certain meat and fish, but at the utmost, we must have the most respect for the treatment of these animals. To me, there's no debate here. There is nothing even to question. It is the only, as civilized human beings, hopefully, we respect those animals and the workers that provide us with food. And they must be treated with the utmost respect and in every way, shape, and form. you're going to read further on, and I'm sure you'll bring it up, but part of it absolutely was abhorrent to me, the way certain animals are treated, and humans. I mean, we should have the utmost, as I say, respect. There is nothing in here that I can even begin to debate, only to
Thank you,
praise,
Barbara.
only to
I'm
praise.
happy to, yes, no, I'm happy to hear you say that about the sources that we're reading. And I do want, all of us to see that, we're not just talking about, a worldview that comes from, granola crunchers or, liberal activists, but I want you to see that this is rooted deeply in Torah, right? Here it is, jumping out at us when, as we're reading the most critical parashot of Torah. Diane Wall.
Youth, speaking about whether it's a Jewish person, a Christian person, or whatever, an animal is an animal. My sister, for it seems like most of my life, she's very into the earth. She used to tell me so much about, if you don't, talk about the climate, we're not going to have an earth anymore. And this goes back like 40 years. Then there was something that had come up where she said, Diane, they're taking these cows and they're squashing them together in these cargo cars. I need you to get involved in this organization called the Humane Association, the fair treatment of animals. And so because of her, I make my donation every year, but it's so absolutely true. We really need to be kind, not only to people, but to animals as well.
Thank you, Diane. You're reminding me of two very, very important people that have done work in this field. One is Temple Grandin. If you haven't read any of her books or seen her in action, type her name into YouTube. She is absolutely brilliant. This is her field. She specifically works in the meat industry, helping plants more ethically treat their animal. She's incredible. She is an absolutely brilliant scholar on this topic, and you should read anything that you can get your hands on written by Temple Grandin. In addition, Jonathan Safran Foer wrote a very, very important book. Forgetting the title. If somebody knows the title, put it into the chat for us. Something about eating meat or not eating meat, or
I'll look it up. I'll look it up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Carolyn, I'm putting it into your hands to call on people. Eating animals. Thank you, Adir.
Okay, and then Shelley. Oh, I guess Adir had to go. Okay, Shelley.
So when I read the first one, which I've read many times, it says so much more to me than about animals. I mean, with apologies to Carolyn, the fact that it actually says your enemy's ox or donkey, it says so much more than about animals. It's speaking volumes about it. It seems like such a ridiculous thing to write, but if you go to the very end of ridiculous, how many people are so awful to other people because they're not important to them or they don't like them? Like it's a legitimate reason to destroy someone's property, perhaps, because you don't like them. They're bad people. So when I have always read the first one, it's been more about animals. It's been an extrapolation of, you have to go to the ends of the earth, even to treat an enemy's property and an enemy's animal well. And I think it speaks volumes about everything we've talked about. I have a granddaughter who's 8 years old and is a vegetarian. And she's gone to such an extreme where she gets so angry at the people around her for eating things that she doesn't approve of. I think that I need to go over this with her, and that it's more about how you treat any living thing, from the environment to animals to human beings. You don't diss a human being to punish them for their behavior toward an animal. It's a very global thought process, in that the way that we treat everything that's alive, as I think Diane Wool talked about the environment. It's the way we see everything. So I don't.
Good.
It's
You're right, Shelley. It's a whole world view. And I'm so happy that you went back to that first mitzvah, which started us off on this particular derech, on this particular path. At the end of the class, I'm going to show you a very, very beautiful midrash that's quoted by Rabbi Sheldon Lewis, who is Arnie Eisen's rabbi from Palo Alto. And that's where we're going to wrap up this class, but it's going to go back to exactly the point that you're making. Naomi?
We just need your son. There you go.
Yes, I think I've got that little finger working. I just wanted to comment that this problem of the terrible treatment of animals and people, and also, the unsanitary conditions, which endangers us all in the stockyards, is not a new phenomenon. I remember reading when I was young, and that was a very long time ago, a novel which was about the stockyards, and I think the novel took place in the early 1900s, and the actual thing that happened was an expose of the conditions, and this was the start of what was called yellow journalism. So that this is a problem that we have come, years and years have passed, and we have made very little progress, which is a shame for all of us.
Absolutely. No, it's something that we've
I
been
think
living with for.
I think it might have been Lincoln Steffens, but I'm not quite sure. My memory
I thought it was is it The Jungle? Langston Hughes, maybe?
Yeah.
Yes,
Right,
The
yes?
Jungle.
Okay.
It was The Jungle.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
It's Sinclair Lewis, right?
Sinclair Lewis. I was just going to say
Sinclair
Sinclair Lewis.
Lewis. You're so right. Thank you.
Sinclair Lewis. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. One more, and then we move on. Phil?
Yeah, every comment has been so wonderful so far. Building on that, just a couple of thoughts. The first is the centrality of Shabbat, which I think is fantastic in terms of a whole world view, especially with the beginning of the Parsha dealing with slavery. All of these issues together, and what Shabbat really focus us on and taking us to a higher level. So that's one point. And the second is, Rabbi, you slipped in something there that I found really interesting. That being the rabbinic take, if I heard you correct, that we're not allowed to invest in companies like McDonald's, etc. And I'm thinking about how many have benefited financially from that. If they knew about this, how it would change, and it's a whole other world in terms of changing one's worldview and one's action and how we benefit one from another.
Exactly, Phil. Good. Okay.
Just one comment. I belong to a stock club, and one of our rules is that we do not invest in any food, any beef, meat, chicken, fowl, fish company. We've invested in many companies, including candy and snacks, but we ethically cannot support. That's just a consensus in my club.
It's interesting, Barbara, and it could be taken even further, just like this whole conversation about ethics of the treatment of animals. And I appreciate that Phil's pointing out that in many ways, Shabbat is what brings all of these different points together that are addressed in Mishpatim, right? Both in terms of the slaves, the animals, that Shabbat is a democratization of creation, that everyone, right, needs Shabbat on that sacred seventh day. Let's share screen and continue with our sources. Okay, very, very famous quote from Mishle, Proverbs chapter 12, verse 10, which tells us the following: Yodea tzadik nefesh behemto. A righteous man knows, or a righteous human, I prefer, knows the needs of his beast or her beast. Okay, let me just change the view here. And then this passage from the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Bava Metzia, 85a, right? The importance of being ethically attuned to all of creation. So look at this story that's taught here. A calf that was being led to the slaughter pushed its head under the corner of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's garment. Just to remind us all, right? Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is Judah the Prince, who is a 2nd century rabbi famous for editing the Mishnah. He lived from 135 to 217 CE. And it tells us that this calf pushed its head under the corner of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi's garment and began bleeding woefully. Rebbe pushed it away, saying, "For this you were created." In other words, you were created to go to slaughter. For this act, he was punished measure for measure. Midah keneged midah. Since he did not have mercy on the calf, it was decreed that he should suffer many years of terrible pain. His healing was also measure for measure. Many years later, when he had mercy on a litter of mice and did not allow his maidservant to sweep them out of the house, God had mercy on him and his pain disappeared. Reactions. I expected some visceral responses to this.
I'm still crying for the poor little calf that was.
Me too. I'm still so upset about the poor little calf.
The cat, right.
You know, and you said, what are you going to say? It was basically said in everything that you wrote, that when we have no pity or show no heart to anything, whether man, woman, child, beast, that how about if that was you? You know, you can go so far back into so much of history of what has happened to the Jews, you know, where there was no pity on us. And then when you spoke about the other, the bird, and then not having the mother watch the taking of her children, you think about the Nazis who did not care. So this is something that's just, I don't know how much more one can say, that it breaks your heart. Well, at least for me, I mean, I can cry if I see a poor dog walking the wrong way. So I'll let others speak.
No. And oftentimes, Diane, what we do is we diminish things or situations like this, saying that we've got much greater things to worry about. Nuclear Iran, the Arab-Israeli conflict, you know, we've got feeding the poor, we've got our hands full, right? And so what do we have to worry about, you know, a poor calf or ethical treatment of animals? And yet, it reminds me of what Abraham Joshua Heschel says about what it is to be a Jew, right? Even to be a mediocre Jew, you've got to be a superhuman being. You've got to be a super Jew because, you know, you have to multitask, right? There are so many ethical concerns, ethical and moral concerns that we have when we look out into God's creation, that it could be overwhelming at times, but still it doesn't mean that, you know, we should say, you know, sort of put it on this ladder of hierarchy. This mitzvah is just as important as, right, any other mitzvah that we have out there. Toby?
And then Matt Weiss.
I think it's interesting that the story talks about a litter of baby mice as the good deed that got that evaded the punishment, because there are reasons not to want mice in the house. And yet, you know, if when this sort of verges on how Buddhists or Jains think about life, that, you know, even harmful animals or animals that we would consider to be pests must be treated kindly and not, I mean, here it wasn't even killed, it was just putting them out of the house. So it's
Toby, you're reminding me that, you know, but when we look at a midrash, right, we're not reading this as fact, we're not reading this as history, but we're reading it for what, right, what is, right, the moral, ethical, principled message that the rabbis are communicating to
right,
us.
and they chose to talk about mice, not about finding a kitten or
right.
or
And I think part of the
other
reason for that is they want to communicate that it's not, you know, it's not simply, you know, about minutia, but it's about a whole posture of existence. It's about, you know, whole posture and holy posture, right? How do we position ourselves in this world? How do we relate not only to our fellow human being, but how do we relate to all of God's creations? You know, I'm also reminded of my lovely wife in this Beit Midrash, who planted a lemon tree and insists that we go out every morning and speak to the lemon tree and nurture the lemon tree and water the lemon tree and feed the lemon tree. You know, it is about a whole worldview that we're talking about.
Right. Matt, then Joel, then Riva, then Naomi.
Yeah, well, it just struck me the line where it said, when he told the calf, for this you were created, and you extrapolated now that you have all these, you know, that's sort of what cows are created for now. We breed cows to be part of this industrial complex of the meat industry. And even look at last year when the meat packing places had the COVID things, there was a backup in the whole industry of the whole grocery industry with the meat. They were killing cows because they couldn't take them for meat and everything. And it's all related to that.
Excellent, Matt. Excellent point.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to take one more comment for now. We're going to move on and then we'll again open it up to conversation.
Joel, you're on.
Sorry. You know, to a certain extent, you know, what struck me is that this whole concept may be a response to theodicy. How does God allow evil in the world? Because the response can be, we are the ones who are responsible for undoing evil in the world and for not doing evil in the world. And if you start off at the very basis with, you know, with chesed toward animals, whether it's mice or a calf or whatever it is, then you can build on that. If that's your basis, then you can build on that and lessen the evil responses that you have to other things and to other people.
Excellent, Joel. I could not have asked for a better segue into the next 4 sources that we're going to take a look at now. So that's a perfect introduction. We're moving to source number 10, Babylonian Talmud. I'm going to scroll down a bit. Here we are. So, Babylonian Talmud teaches us, Rabbi Judah quoted Rav, eating meat was not permitted to Adam, or Adam. As it is written, all the green grasses will be yours for food, and for all the animals on land, right? That the green grasses will be food for the animals as well. God did not permit you, the living creatures. But when the sons of Noah came, right, that is after the flood, God permitted them to eat animals. As it is written, as with green grasses, I give you all of these, right? So notice if you haven't before, there's this qualitative change that we have, right? The ideal state of creation is one in which we are all vegetarians. It's only afterwards, that is after the flood, after Noah, that we're permitted to eat meat. And this is seen as a compromise. Look at what Joseph Albo, one of the great rabbis of the tradition, writes. He says the following: the retroactive permission to eat meat was an attempt of the Torah to combat the evil inclination. Aside from the cruelty, rage, and fury in killing animals, and the fact that it teaches human beings the bad trait of shedding blood for naught, eating the flesh, even of select animals, will give rise to a mean and insensitive soul. This connects perfectly with what Joel was saying before we started looking at these sources. Look at the next two sources as well. Don Isaac Abravanel, a commentary on Exodus chapter 16. He writes, God said to Moses, eating meat is not essential for one's nutrition. Rather, it is a form of gluttony, of filling one's belly and increasing one's lust. Meat also gives rise to a cruel and evil temperament in men. Therefore, you will find that the animals and birds of prey that eat meat are cruel and evil. But sheep and cattle, hens, turtle doves, and doves sustain themselves on the grass of the field, and they have neither cruelty nor wickedness in them. Therefore, God did not tell Moses that God would give the Israelites meat, but bread, right? The manna that fell from the heavens, which is a fitting food and is essential for human temperament. Hence it is written, I will rain down bread for you from the sky. And the final source for this section, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, who I know I've studied a number of his writings with many of you in the Beit Midrash. His dates are 1865 to 1935. He was the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi of British Mandatory Palestine. And very famously, he wrote a treatise on vegetarianism and peace. And he writes, it is an overall moral shortcoming of mankind, for it does not promote good and lofty sentiments to take the life of any living creature for one's own needs and pleasures. It is impossible to imagine that the Lord of all, who takes pity on his creatures, would make such an everlasting law in his very good work of creation that mankind could not survive except by violating its sense of morality in shedding blood, even if it be the blood of animals. And Yehuda Mirsky, in his book on Rav Kook, Mystic in a Time of Revolution, he writes the following. He was in conversation, apparently, with a British Jew at one point during his sojourn in England. He was let off with a stern warning, but kept on, unimpressed by invocations of the moral significance of the British war effort. So long as people go on eating meat, Rav Kook told a British Jew who chose not to avail himself of the military exemptions available to his sons, there is no hope for the human animal until the Messiah comes, right? He really saw it, ad kadei kach, he saw it, right, to such an extent, right, that it truly affects human nature. Responses to any of those sources?
I know Naomi had her hand up before, as did Riva. But can we start with those two?
Okay. I was just wanted to comment on the story about the litter of mice being expelled from the house. And I think that somehow or other, I think we have to interpret a lot of the things that we read in terms of the state of knowledge of that day. If it had been a nest of baby venomous snakes, do you think that he would have said, oh, you have to leave them in the house? It just doesn't make sense. I think we have to interpret a lot of stuff in saying this was what they knew at that time, and it made a lot of sense. But otherwise, I said I'm not going to live with some copperheads in the house. I mean, you get that?
Very good, Naomi. We always have to take context, historical context, into consideration.
Riva?
When
when I read all of this, to me, I mean, it is a lot of minutia. It's a little bit schizophrenic, trying to figure out if we're supposed to be vegetarians or if we're okay eating meat, even if we obey kashrut. But to me, the much bigger message is us being the chosen people. And a lot of people rail against the idea that the Jews are the chosen people. But the question is, what are we chosen for? And I don't think we're chosen to, in terms of being special, that we're better than other people. I think it's more that God gave us the Torah, and what we are chosen for is perhaps to be the conscience of the world, or to set an example. So there's sort of an injunction that we're to lead by example.
Excellent. It's not about superiority, right? But rather it's right being chosen for specific responsibilities that devolve on our shoulders, right? How to bring this message, this divine message forward.
Thank you. Shelley, then Adir.
Okay, so as a zoologist, reading number 12, which is what, by the way, what I majored in, it's absurd to attribute cruelty and evilness to a lion. And to assume that because you eat meat, you would end up with those attributes, which I'm not sure those are considered attributes, but anyway. It's all about gluttony. It's all about taking too much, more than one needs. Whether you choose to eat meat or you don't choose to eat meat, in my opinion, it's all about the way you view it. Are you eating it to nourish yourself and to a degree of satisfying yourself, versus consuming everything in sight because you can? And the rabbi's commentaries don't make a lot of sense. This one, number 12, I think optimally, Rabbi Cook is saying optimally we would all be vegetarians, but we're clearly, you missed the part about with Noah prior to the flood, people were literally ripping people apart and eating them as is, either animals. It's all about gluttony and taking more than you need and raping the world of what is, disrespecting what's in the world. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thank
Plenty
you.
of food for thought there.
Adir.
Thanks. Having read all this, how do you justify sacrifice?
How do we justify korbanot? Okay, so the way of understanding korbanot, sacrifices in the tradition, I believe is through the lens of how it is that Maimonides contextualizes korbanot, which is to say that other Near Eastern peoples, right, whom the Israelites were living amongst, were worshiping their gods in that particular way by offering sacrifices. Right, that was the known way of engaging in relationship with your God, right? So it would have been too foreign, this is what Maimonides explains, to say to the Israelites, simply serve God with your heart, right? Rather, right, do it with sacrifices, because that's what the Israelites saw all around them. But Maimonides saw it as bound to a particular time, right? That eventually, right, this need for animal sacrifices would disappear, right? And perhaps the way of, looking at our messianic future would be not offering animals, but perhaps it's bikurim, perhaps it's first fruits, perhaps it's the best of our vegetables that we offer to God rather than, rather than animals. But you're right, Adir, there's definitely a cognitive dissonance that we have looking at this. On the one hand, we're reading all of these sources about ethical treatment of animals. On the other, right, the moment we get to Vayikra, it seems that all of that goes out the window as we read of, korbanot. What do we do with that? Okay, I want to bring us to more sources, and then we'll open it again at the end. I know time is fleeting very quickly. So I wanted to take a look at some sources which give us a sense of how we can make a difference, what areas we can make a difference in terms of our eating habits and ethical treatment of animals. So I want to show you part of one responsum that was written by Rabbi David Galinkin, in which he addressed the kashrut of veal raised on factory farms.
Rabbi,
And,
we just lost your picture. At least I can't see your picture.
let's try again.
Well, I mean, your video, we had the share screen, but I lost seeing you. I don't know if anyone else had that same experience.
Yeah, I just see
on.
you. Yeah.
Am I back?
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Let's try share screen again. Rabbi David Galinkin writes, answering the question, is it permissible for Jews to raise, purchase, or eat veal from calves raised on factory farms? And he writes the following: calves are transported from their farms of origin, where they are placed in small individual wooden crates, deprived of all access to bedding and solid food, and fed twice daily regulated amounts of liquid. The animal is unable to turn around, stretch its limbs, adopt all normal lying positions, or groom itself. Deprivation denies calves the opportunity to perform normal eating and rumination behavior. And then he goes to the following conclusions. Right, his conclusions are: it is forbidden to muzzle an ox when it treads out the corn. Veal calves are not treading corn, but it is cruel and inhumane to prevent them from nursing, drinking water, and consuming the iron they require. B, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar ruled, one may not purchase a domestic or wild animal or a fowl unless one is able to feed it properly. Veal calves are clearly not being fed properly. And C, the Torah states, I will provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and you will eat and be satisfied. The Talmud derives from this that one may not sit down to eat until one's animals are fed. Our rabbis would never have tolerated the misfeeding of veal calves. Okay, probably will not surprise you that Rabbi Galinkin is a vegetarian. Dr. Yael Shemesh, Bar-Ilan University. So she writes here about eggs from hens in industrial chicken coops and pâté de foie gras. Hens naturally live in small groups. The hens enjoy taking sand baths, running about the yard and flying around. They lay their eggs in privacy in nests that they build. None of this is true of commercial chicken coops. The hens cannot move around. Overcrowding and tension causes hens to pick at their own feathers. Eating eggs laid by free-range hens is not only morally preferable, but also better for one's health. And pâté de foie gras, geese are held in tight cages where they cannot move around, so that all food forced into their body goes to fattening them. The geese are force-fed through a tube used to insert vast quantities of food. She writes, avoid this altogether. Nicholas Kristof, right, where I started, right, this article that appeared on February 6th. He writes of the Costco chicken: the chickens grow enormous breasts because that's the meat consumers want. So the bird's legs sometimes splay or collapse. Some topple onto their backs and they can't get up. Others spend so much time on their bellies that they sometimes suffer angry, bloody rashes called ammonia burns. These are a poultry version of bed sores. They're living on their own feces with no fresh air and no natural light, said Leah Garces, the president of Mercy for Animals. I don't think it's what a Costco customer expects, and I don't think it's what any of us would expect or would tolerate. And the final source I want to share with you before going back to your voices is the source that I alluded to when Shelley was speaking before. This takes us back to the commandment where we started, the mitzvah where we started, that Rabbi Sheldon Lewis quotes in his book, The Torah of Reconciliation. Look at how beautifully he treats, or this midrash treats, the mitzvah that we started with. Rabbi Alexandri said, 2 donkey drivers who hated each other were walking along the road. The donkey of one of them lay down. His fellow passed by and saw that he was lying down under his burden. He said, does it not say in the Torah, if you see the donkey of him that hates you, You will surely raise it with him. What did he do? He turned back and loaded the animal and accompanied his enemy. He began to converse with him. That is, the two enemies were conversing. He loosened the straps a little from one side, lifted it from the other side, and strapped on that side until he had reloaded the donkey with him. The result was that they made peace with each other. The other said, "Didn't I think that he was my enemy? See how he had mercy on me when he saw me and my donkey in dire straits," unquote. The consequence was that they entered an inn and ate and drank together. They developed affection for each other. Right? Again, this particular midrash is communicating that it's a worldview, and by engaging in the mitzvah of ethical treatment in animals, what ends up happening? Two human beings who are enemies of each other end up making peace with each other. Right? How beautiful is that? Right? So once again, Shelley, you are our avant-garde chalutza, who in so many ways prophesied the source that we got to, that it's not just about ethical treatment of animals that we read about at the beginning of Parashat Mishpatim, but what's so important here? Torah is demanding that we cooperate with our enemy, right? The donkey has to be lifted imo, with him. Okay, we don't just do it on our own, but it's compelling cooperation. Very, very beautiful. Comments, questions?
I know Arvin had his hand up previously, so how about Arvin, then Larry? They haven't gotten a chance to speak yet. Arvin? You just need to unmute.
Reading all these sources, it's interesting that the Torah is not shy about reciting prohibitions and injunctions. And then with the prohibitions, there are the din and the chok, those for which there is an explanation, those for which there are not. So reading what we've read this morning, there is no prohibition that I've ever come across that said thou shalt not eat meat, you can't eat chicken, you can't eat fish. There are prohibitions obviously dealing with pork and shellfish, for which there is no explanation. But in the context of this notion of the cruelty to animals, I view kashrut in a different perspective. I think that, number one, I think kashrut is a matter of personal discipline, which the Torah directly or indirectly, the rabbis directly or indirectly are imposing on us. And I think that our attitude toward animals is really the notion of extension of our behavior with our fellow humans, so that if we can show a modicum of respect for others, other living beings, then perhaps that'll extend into our relationship with people, so that when we talk about lifting the donkey of the enemy, it's not that we are necessarily more merciful toward the donkey, but perhaps that's an extension later on, as you pointed out just now with this midrash. So I view the kindness to animals, the living conditions, as an extension. If you're not going to allow chickens to live in a humane environment, then by extension we may say, well, why should we allow people to live in a humane environment? And it's not that we can't eat chickens. We can eat them. We're not prohibited from eating them. But I think that this colors our relationship with people. And that's what I think the message of these midrashim is getting at in terms of what is and is not prohibited. And I'm not going to apologize to those who prefer to be vegetarians. I am not. But I also know that there's a certain discipline in my own life that I impose in certain respects without explanation, probably for traditional purposes. But that's how I view kashrut and the respect for animals.
Very beautifully said, Arvin. And in so many ways, you're connecting back to what Diane Trotterman said earlier on. And you're reminding me, I remember when I was at the Schefter Institute studying homiletics with Rabbi Shmuel Avidor Cohen, Zichrono Livracha, told a very, very beautiful story of walking on the Upper West Side in the late 1960s, passing a fruit and vegetable stand, and he saw a kashrut certificate over fruits and vegetables that was signed by none other than Abraham Joshua Heschel. Okay, and why did he feel compelled to give a kashrut certificate to fruit? This is not something that you normally see outside of Israel. In Israel, you do see it because it's related to the agricultural mitzvot in Israel, but normally you don't see that outside of Israel. And apparently, he told the story, it was related to Abraham Joshua Heschel's belief, again, that it was connected to the ethical treatment of human beings, that it was telling people that this was not grown by oppressed African-American labor, that it was ethically grown produce, right? And think of how ahead of his time he was, right? Now, everybody is talking about this today. I know it's especially an issue in Florida with tomatoes and migrant workers, and right, I know that was going on for a number of years. But Arvin, I feel like I'm in the same boat as you. I am not a vegetarian yet. And certainly these sources are, giving me, plenty of food for, I feel like I live with this tension because the better part of me wants to do it, but my stomach tells me otherwise, that I can't live without chicken and fish.
Right.
So, but, it's, I do feel that it's more of an ideal that we should aspire to. I do believe that.
Larry, and I will say there is some robust conversation going on through the chat. I'm not as good a multitasker as I think some of you, but I think we could have a class based on some of the comments that are coming up on the chat. Larry Goldberg, then Toby.
A couple comments. Back in reference 12, they talked about animals of prey versus animals that eat of the grasses and whatnot. There's an irony there in that those are the animals that, when you look at the laws of kashrut, the animals that eat grass, the animals that are not animals of prey, those are the animals that were permitted to eat. So I mean, you would imagine that those would be animals that we would not want to eat, because they're basically minding their own business and doing, eating. They're not animals of prey. The other comment is, I agree with Arvin, but the other interesting thing is in terms of when you compare Judaism to some other faiths, the Hindus will think cows are sacred. But they wouldn't think twice about killing a Muslim that kills the cow, and so their respect for the cow doesn't extend to other human beings. And likewise, you can sort of extrapolate that to people that are against abortion, who wouldn't think twice about killing someone who does abortions. That life is sacred except when it's not. Judaism believes all life is sacred, and in none of these sources do they say if you see your enemy burdening his beast, doesn't say hate your enemy or kill your enemy because they're not respecting their beast, but rather to respect the beast and take precedence to respect life, and overlook whatever hatred you have. But the most important thing is life. So
Thank you, Larry. Thank you.
I think we have time maybe for one more comment. Toby had her hand up before, because we're getting to the finish line here.
I just want you to say that, the ancient texts talk about treating animals kindly and with respect. And then we get to some of the modern texts, which are talking about about commercial agriculture and how animals are treated in factory slaughterhouses and factory farming. And part of it is that in addition to the cruelty to animals, it's such a large part of climate change is the way factory agriculture, factory farming, and the amount of resources that it takes not to have some chickens out in your backyard, but to breed chickens for food the way they are fed. So that's another reason, and I'm not there yet either, but that's another reason to think really, really carefully about eating meat and where it's sourced and how it's grown, is that it's part of what's destroying our planet.
Thank you, Toby. Carolyn, I think we need to end this session. I'm very concerned about what's being written in the chat, and I don't know what I'm going to eat by the end of this class. So
If anyone
I think
needs
it's time
vegan
to wrap.
recipes, call me.
Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Thank you for another fantastic session, Rabbi. Your your leadership with the text and all of your comments really just added so much to our nuanced understanding of this. Really beautiful. I want to bring your attention to upcoming events. Make sure you check the JTS news and events page on the website. The JTS library is not quite open to the public yet, but there's going to be a fantastic program in cooperation with Temple Emmanuel in New York. On February 24th, our librarian, David Kramer, is doing a program with Chancellor Shuli Schwartz, showing some of the rare items that will be, in their new space soon in the library. It is a program open to the public. You just need to sign up online. You'll get the Zoom link for that. Some really fantastic things happening. Again,
Carolyn, also connected to that, I just want to mention that I know a number of you were in the session yesterday with Yossi Klein Halevi on Israeli music during the time of Corona. And it was spectacular. It was
Beautiful.
Heartfelt, brilliant. We have a recording of it. If you're interested in seeing it, we can be sure to pass that along to you. But I'm mentioning it because our next Israel program is going to be on March 8th. Adi Ness, who is just about Israel's most famous photographer, is going to be teaching about contemporary Israeli photography meeting Tanakh, Tanakh stories. You're in for a real treat. So I want to be sure that you get that on your calendar early. We will be sure to remind you of it. March 8th, 1 p.m. And not to be missed. It's going to be another brilliant program. Carolyn.
We'll send those notes out in an upcoming email, along with, I think, a vegan challah recipe, which I'm looking forward to getting. So again, thank you all for being with us. Your participation really just adds to the whole texture. My favorite time in the morning. All right, take care and Shabbat Shalom.